The future of higher education may be less about going at it alone and more about learning how to thrive together. And I think that's the value of our network, and that's the reality of what these institutions, particularly small colleges, are going to have to admit to and get out of the ego and realize what's necessary for the survival and the advancement of the mission in which they were called.
Welcome to Small College America, a podcast dedicated to exploring the role and value of small colleges in the higher education landscape. I'm Dean Hoke, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kent Barnes.
Thanks, Dean. Our guest today is a good friend of mine, Reverend Lamont Anthony Wells, who serves as Executive Director of the Network of ELCA Colleges and Universities. And for those of you who are not familiar, ELCA stands for the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. And Lamont, his leadership of this association, represents 28 institutions connected through the ELCA in America. In this role, he works with presidents and campus leaders across the network to strengthen collaboration and support the mission of Lutheran higher education in the U.S. and the world. Earlier in his career, Lamont served as program director for campus ministries in the ELCA, helping lead a network of faith and service communities on and near more than 240 college campuses across the country. He has also served as a Lutheran campus pastor within the Atlanta University Center, one of the nation's most prominent historically Black college communities. Lamont is a graduate of Morehouse College and later completed graduate studies in ministry and leadership at the Interdenominational Theological Center. Lamont, we are delighted to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
You bet. We'll turn to Dean, who I think is going to ask you your first question.
All right.
Well, Lamont, why don't we start talking a little bit about the association itself? You serve as the Executive Director, which, as Kent mentioned, represents over 28 Lutheran affiliated institutions?
I like to say that we're growing. When I started this role about 4 years ago, we had 26, and then now we have 28, and we can talk about what that is. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's showing growth. Well, why don't you go ahead for our listeners and viewers? Why don't you tell a little bit more about the association? What does it do, and what's your role?
Mm-hmm. Particularly, NECU as a network really serves as a connector, if you will, or even a catalyst, I like to say. I like that word, a catalyst in higher education, particularly for the Lutheran brand or the Lutheran missional identity. And so our network exists to kind of strengthen this shared mission of what it means to be a part of a Lutheran body or connected to the Lutheran tradition. So therefore, we've been able to, over the years, there are about 26 ELCA founded or organized institutions. And we also have one relationship with a college, Luther College in Canada. Mm-hmm. And then we have an associate membership of an independent Lutheran college, Valparaiso in Indiana. So that makes up the consortium of 28 colleges and universities. And Dean, particularly at its heart, NECU exists as a network primarily to help our institutions commit to educating the whole person, which is a part of the Lutheran core values of mind, body, and spirit, while also preparing the students for the common good. One of our strengths is kind of moving into the area of vocational identity. We don't own that word, but we sure claim it in a strong way as part of the clear foundation that really should set us apart from some other institutions. Yeah.
Well, let me follow up with that a little bit. For someone to be outside the Lutheran tradition, what makes an ECU network distinctive compared to other higher education associations, whether religious or secular?
Mm-hmm. I would say that we are a values-based network, right? So we're not organized by regions because we have, schools all across every sector of the North America, but primarily emphasizing vocation. That's what sets us apart. Intellectual curiosity and service to neighbor, kind of in this composite, if you will, right? Helping our institutions to realize at a time when institutions are pressured to have career advancement and career connections for their students and making sure that there's opportunity for placement after receiving the degree. We believe that we are educating our students not only about about their careers, but their purpose and their calling, which extends greater and beyond just a particular career that often is limiting, right? So we talk about vocation, not just what job you'll have, but what are you called to be? Who are you called to be in the world? Some call it purpose, but we use the language of vocational identity. What is your calling to the world, particularly realizing that this expensive education that you're about to get is not just for you. It is for you to, take care of yourself and your family, but that you have a purpose to receive this knowledge and education in order to make the world a better place. And that, to me, is the true connection, Kent and Dean, particularly about the public good of Lutheran higher education.
Very good. Ken?
Really appreciate that response. Lamont, as you know, I've been at Augustana, which is one of the ELCA-related colleges and universities for a long time.
One of our oldest.
Go back to a time when our Lutheran identity sometimes was defined in more traditional manners. How many Lutheran faculty members do you have? How many Lutheran students do you have? So many church-related colleges now enroll students from a wide range of backgrounds, religiously, socially, socioeconomically, and relatively few members of the community are associated with the founding denomination. How do Lutheran colleges maintain their identity and mission in that environment?
Yeah, that's a real good question, particularly when we think about the value of our network, right? As we are re-engaging in what has historically been some fractured relationships. I'm an honest person, right? And with new presidents and new leaders, we're living in a time when many of our presidents are not Lutheran as what was required historically, right? So how are we living into this or leaning into this at the same time dealing with populations that are not from quote unquote our brand or our fold, if you will, particularly our denomination? So I would first say that the Lutheran identity isn't about having campuses full of Lutherans. I know that that's what it was, like historically, right? Because how they were founded, right? But it's really about cultivating a community that are shaped by Lutheran values. Now we're on to something. I often say that I'm not concerned about the big L of Lutherans, right? And filling butts and seats and pews, that kind of thing, that mindset. But the little L, the core values of what it means to be Lutheran. And these colleges have never been defined by only who attends, but particularly by the values that shape the education that happens on each of these campuses. The intellectual inquiry, right? The true sense of service to neighbor and lifting up human dignity, right? So we have developed a common calling understanding amongst our institutions into a key white paper, I call it, right? Our key motto is rooted and open. That's a term that we use, that we're rooted in our Lutheran faith tradition because of the core values and some of those I've espoused a few minutes ago. But primarily, we want people to understand that we're not closed, but we're open to engagement with other traditions that are not like our own, particularly interreligious, interfaith, and ecumenical. One of the big things about the ELCA as a religious denomination is I believe that even out of most other denominations that are Protestant in America, we connect to, I like to say we date everybody, right? So we have full communion partnership with the United Methodist Church tradition, the Presbyterian tradition, the Disciples of Christ tradition. We have all the 6 full communion partners where we relate to each other with no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Even our Catholic tradition, we have some levels of agreement amongst them. So again, we're rooted in our tradition, but we're definitely open because we see the need for expansion in many kinds of ways, which is also a core value of what it means to be Lutheran. When Martin Luther, early on in the development of the Protestant Reformation, he wanted to make education accessible to all, right? So not just in your own tribe, right? But accessible to everyone, which meant even in a patriarchal time, open to women, which they weren't so quick on pulling that together, right? Particularly here in the American tradition of Lutheran education, but also race, ethnicity, and other demographics that make us open to all.
And that whole concept of rooted and open and those terms and that essential white paper is such a good representation of how we maintain and expand that identity. So
Yeah,
thank you for that response, Lamont.
Well, why don't we move into a little bit more current and challenging
yeah.
subject right now, and that's particularly about closures and mergers and alliances that's been going on. You know, in the recent years, we've seen so many small colleges close or merge or become acquirers, I guess, or explore, new partnership models. Do you foresee similar developments among the Lutheran colleges? Do you see additional closures or mergers happening? What do you see right now currently, and what do you see in the future?
Of course, I see what's going on in the world around us, but I'm looking in my room for some wood to knock on because I don't want to close on any other colleges or universities. Because when I first took this role 4 years ago, my first 100 days included the closing of one of our dear institutions, Finlandia University, right?
Yeah.
So, having just come into this role and the headwind that I get after, over many other years of connection with this institution, Finlandia, it closed within my first 100 days. So I learned early on the need for me to understand what's going on, particularly with all of these headwinds. So yes, we see what's going on. There are some significant structural pressures that institutions are facing, financial pressures, and even now in this climate, political pressures. But I believe that these pressures that are facing higher education, even though they're real, they're also pushing some of our institutions towards innovation and collaboration in ways. And many of them are able to make those decisions early on. I lament that Finlandia closed because when I look at Hancock, Michigan, in that particular area, in that peninsula, I know that there's a need for an institution like ours in an area of the United States of America like that, right? Like we were a good light, if you will, like in that particular area. But now that it's closed, there's that void. And with building and properties, once you sell things, you'll never get it back. So I think that our Lutheran colleges do have a long tradition of adaptation and resilience, particularly as immigrant communities, people coming in from rural areas and regions and emerging social needs. It required us to be flexible. So what I'm finding is that many of our Lutheran institutions remain committed to their missional clarity with academic excellence, but also looking at the fiscal responsibility and the governance responsibility that will help them to become sustainable. I admire my institutions like yours, Kent, have done an amazing job of seeing the need that essential workers are strong and needed in our world. Nursing is a big profession, and we just recently acquired an institution connected to Augustana College that will help it grow. So mergers and consolidations are something that is very important. The other thing that I'm looking at is some of our colleges that are small could also learn some shared resourcing that could help them, right? So it's not always about the mergers, but before they get to that point, that you have a couple of institutions that are less than 30 miles or 40 miles apart from each other that could have and or share one maybe finance director, or they could share some academic programs. You have this one at this institution, but focus on another at another institution. So there are different ways to do innovation and collaboration that I'm noticing many of our Lutheran institutions are doing. But I think the future of higher education may be less about going at it alone and more about learning how to thrive together. And I think that's the value of our network, and that's the reality of what these institutions, particularly small colleges, are going to have to admit to and get out of the ego and realize what's necessary for the survival and the advancement of the mission in which they were called.
So, Lamont, with all that being said, do you see a direct role with the network in being involved, either as
Yes.
a message, a passing
Definitely.
the message
I
along,
do.
a direct involvement. Yeah, tell me about how
I
you
do,
see
whether
that.
they want it or not, Dean. I show up and I serve on many of the boards, and I always bring this 30,000 foot view perspective into the room so that they understand what's going on because I see things happening at other institutions. So I see my role as a convener and as an enzyme, if you will, that is a catalyst within our network to help them to come to some of these decisions sooner than the reactive later that is required. So again, I bring to these institutions honest conversation and strategic collaboration and helping them, and then I get to see which boards are ready to talk to each other, right? Like which leaders are ready to have these strong considerations. So a network like NECU allows institutions to move from isolation, if you will, to collaboration, and we can do that internally. It won't make the chronicle for higher education because, the vow of silence and the vow of confidentiality. And so those things get out of hand. So I think that's the beauty of our network, that someone like me on behalf of the church that has no financial gain or anything that we desire out of the merger, consolidation, or connection to happen. All we want is the missional value to be extended and expanded.
Very good. Ken?
Lamont, we want to ask a question about the relationship between the church and the colleges and the network that you represent. Historically, many Lutheran colleges were founded by immigrant congregations and church communities to serve immediate needs in a particular geographic area. How would you describe the relationship today between the ELCA and its affiliate colleges?
Mhm. I think the relationship today primarily is best understood, I would say, as a partnership and forming leaders. Like we both have those desires, right? And also, again, the ultimate desire is to serve the common good for people. Historically, you named it. Lutheran colleges were born out of the church's commitment to education, right? We needed an educated population, and that shared mission still connects today, I think, in a lot of ways, but I think it's varied and it's not organized in the same way. So I would say that the shared mission has also some distinct roles. So the ELCA and Lutheran colleges, I would say that the church nurtures faith communities and spiritual formation. I see that as the church's role, right? And then I see colleges and universities cultivating learning and cultivating leadership and vocational discernment about how people operate and live in the world. But together they contribute to kind of a broader mission of service and justice and human flourishing out in the world around us. In some ways, you could say it like this. I think the church proclaims the gospel, if you will, the gospel of Jesus Christ, right, in our context, right? But Lutheran colleges help students explore what that gospel means for how we live and how we learn and how we serve in the world. So the preparation comes from our education institutions, and many of our education institutions were founded first as seminaries or theological institutions first, right? And then expanded to holistic liberal arts education, which we want to keep that missional identity infused into our institutions as well.
Lamont, I may go off a little bit off topic here, but
Mhm.
one of my fascinations about the association and the network and your role, I mean, in a sense, you're an eyes and ears of multiple institutions, which means you see some common similarities, but at the same time, you also see the differences and things like that. I'm a bit fast. I'm curious about what you see within the student population. Do you get a chance to see the students themselves? Do you get a chance to get that? I'd be curious about your thoughts
Yeah,
about the students that
that's
go to these schools.
Yeah, that's key and important. And that's my litmus test, if you will, Dean, for how successful this relationship is, right? I want to make sure that when I'm on every college campus, there's not a time that I come to a board meeting that I don't allow any extra time to sit in the cafeteria, or most of them have Starbucks or some kind of coffee house where I get a chance to engage students. And it helps me to understand how to advocate for them, right? So like I'm not there just to keep institutions open. I want the institutions to stay open so that they can continue to serve the needs of the students. So I often want to make sure that our institutions are doing that. So yes, I talk to students, and what I hear is one of the big things that they're facing is kind of this overwhelmed nature of what's going on in the world around us, which relates to their stress levels and mental health, which is something that is big and that we realize that many of our institutions need to focus on because so much is going on in around the world. I remember when I was in school, 35 years ago, we had a few protests and things that were going on. The Rodney King uprisings were occurring and things like that. So the race issue was kind of coming to a head after having after a lot of that happened in the 60s and 70s, and it was coming up again, but it kind of quickly died down. But now it's a constant cycle that these students are having to navigate and deal with these kinds of things. Also, our international student population began to grow strong, and many of our institutions really depended upon our immigrant or international student populations to kind of enhance the diversity amongst the student body. And many of those students are living in fear about being deported and or their education visas being denied. So these are high stress things that many of them are dealing with. And my hope is that our institutions, as we're also advocating and fighting for them in Washington at the federal level with the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, but also when we're right there dealing with those students, Dean, my hope is that our campus ministry partnerships are providing a space for listening to these students and providing a spiritual kind of encouragement and spiritual comfort, particularly in an interfaith understanding, providing space for all faiths to be able to participate in the life of those institutions. But also, I'll end with this. The other thing we realize in kind of religious spiritual connection is eating and having a place of connecting. And we often do that over a meal. But we're living at a time when students are dealing and facing strong issues related to food insecurity as well. So, as a part of the church, I have gotten many of our synods, which are our jurisdictions, and local congregations to support our students by having food pantries and providing open space, unused space in our churches to have meetings and have gatherings. So those are some of the true connections that I see. Those are some of the issues that I see our students are facing, but how we are trying to support and help address those crises.
Very good. Kent, you have the last question.
Lamont, one of the things that we enjoy with each of our guests is to give them a chance to kind of look in the crystal ball and see the future. And so we would love to know your perspective on what the next decade holds for ELCA colleges. What gives you the most optimism about the future of this network of colleges and the role that they can play as predominantly small institutions within the higher education landscape in the U.S.? What gives you hope and optimism about the ELCA colleges?
So much, because they're so distinct and they're doing some great things. I love how they're transformed and how many of them are learning their historical commitments, right, as far as their rootedness, but also leaning into full force with advancing the mission of really that openness. So when I look across these institutions and what I hope for their future is that their future is bold, primarily welcoming and being prepared to welcome students from many backgrounds in a time when things related to the diversity, equity, and inclusion are taboo. We're leaning into it because we believe in belonging as a part of our true identity and cultural connections and finding those kinds of things. So I hope that that we will be kind of, if you will, academic leaders and educational leaders in the way of welcoming students from all backgrounds and primarily being optimistic about the things that are going on in the world around us, as not to retreat from the world and hide ourselves and hide our gifts, if you will, under a bushel, if I were to use a religious reference, right? But preparing students to engage this world with courage and humility and purpose. So if our Lutheran education does what it's supposed to do, if we think, right, and it remains faithful to its calling to educate the whole person and to serve the neighbor, then I believe its future will not only remain strong, but it will remain essential. And that's where I want to see our institutions. I don't, people saying, does a liberal arts education matter anymore? And people were pushing STEM related things over the last years, and all of those are needed, but employers are asking for critical thinkers, people that know how to manage crises, right? And people who understand cultural proclivities in various demographics, so that you have learned about Asian cultures and community and don't see this as an enemy, but see as an opportunity, if you will, to engage different cultures that are unlike our own. So that's how I see the future of Lutheran higher education. And I think that we have a niche, if you will, that's able to propel our brand into the world because of the kind of graduates that we will and are producing every year.
Well, that is a strong statement, and also an outstanding statement about liberal arts education in small colleges. So I want to thank you for that, but I'm also afraid we're out of time.
Oh, I was just feeling I was on
You
a
were just
roll.
ready to start doing a little bit more of that, I think.
This has
Well,
been great.
we'll have to add another half hour to the show to try that. But today, I want to thank you very much for joining us and sharing your perspective on ELCA and the broader future of Lutheran higher education. For those listening or viewing, if you'd like to learn more about Small College America, visit our website at www.smallcollegeamerica.net, where you can find details on upcoming episodes, contact us, suggest topics that you'd like us to cover. I also encourage you, of course, to subscribe to our series on your favorite podcast network. This episode of Small College America is made possible with the underwriting support of EduAlliance Group, a higher education consulting firm that champions small colleges and the communities they serve. On behalf of our guests, Reverend Lamont Wells, my co-host, of course, Kent Barnes, and myself, thank you very much for joining us.